So let's do a quick little mental review of what we've covered so far. We talked about the idea that we take our challenges and we lock them, and then we don't pay too much attention to them. So when they come up, we just get this weird feeling, and then we intellectualize about them. We try to use our mind to find the way out instead of welcoming and experiencing the process, seeing if it has something to teach us. We talked about the idea that sometimes we get into our game, we get into our way of seeing things, and we become completely convinced that ours is the right way. It is the way to look at things. And we forget that it's just one of many perspectives, and that all of them are partial. Who experienced a point during the first section where they were a little bit frustrated or a little bit confused? Raise your hand. A little bit of frustration, confusion, like impatience maybe. I'm not getting what I want. This isn't what I thought I was going to get. Who experienced some twinge of frustration or emotion, or I don't really like this, or this doesn't seem right to me, or something like that? Raise your hand. Good. If you didn't, you probably weren't with us. Okay? So if you were probably off spacing out in your mind and intellectualizing and analyzing and not doing the exercise and thinking, oh yeah, I did that in a seminar once, I don't need to do that again. If that didn't happen for you, you're probably not here with us. Or you're an enlightened master, and we all need to be learning from you. Well, we need to be learning from you anyway, because we're all here to learn from each other. So what's the point of having Steve and Eric here at that particular point? Does anyone know what I was trying to do yesterday?
To see where we can go.
To see where we can go? No. Almost just like that, but the opposite. What was I trying to do in the first section? Wake us up, scramble. What? Shake up the belief system. Suspend judgment. All right, so what was I trying to do yesterday? Kill the bubble? Get out of the comfort zone? Claim our nuts. Reclaim our nuts. Some the initial claiming of the nuts. Some are reclaiming of the nuts. Unfreeze stuff. Who wants to get the goods on what it takes to actually become a man? Who really wants to know? Who's still curious? Yeah, me too, by the way. I went upstairs last night and I looked at my whole plan for today, and I reflected on what we did, and I trashed it. We're all going to new territory today. Okay? I've got a rough idea of the things that we're going to do, but we're going somewhere together, and I'm trying to integrate the needs of the group and the insights of the group together. Let me talk to you a little bit about what I think this journey about becoming a man is about. In our cultures, in our Western cultures, and I'm not really that familiar with the Eastern because, or maybe this is going on over there as well, but our life expectancy is getting longer. Okay? Lifespan is getting longer. But something curious is happening. In America, where I live, we are the richest country that has ever existed. Essentially probably the most dominant force in the evolution of our species that has happened. Very powerful, changing the world in so many different ways. Some positive, some maybe not so positive. But it's hard to deny that it is a freight train going somewhere. Now, what would you expect to happen if you get a country and this many people, this wealthy, with this much brain power? You'd expect them to be leading in every area. One area that I'm particularly fascinated with, that we'll talk more about in a little bit later section, is you'd expect, I would anyway, a country like this to definitely have the longest lifespan of any other country. Right? If we're the wealthiest, have the most access to just about everything. You know where America stands in lifespan right now? What number, according to Wikipedia? Number 29. Number 29. What's going on here? As we become more affluent and more successful as a nation, it seems that we're becoming lazier and more complacent and fatter and every other thing that's kind of the sign of excess. And that concerns me a lot. That's on a macro scale, and I won't get up and start preaching at you. But I look down, then I zoom down, and I say, okay, what about our men? What are we doing there? Now, one thing that's kind of neat that I think is happening is maybe over the last 50 years or so, what used to happen in the teens has now started extending out through the 20s. We're staying free and single and exploring and figuring out who we are right in through our 20s. We're not even really too worried about what's going to happen later until maybe we get into our 30s. You know what? I'll worry about that settling down stuff and having a family and what I'm going to do for a career when I'm 30. And it's weaving its way into pop culture and film and everything else. And that's neat in one way because it allows us to figure out a little bit more who we are, find our gifts, find the things that we want to do, figure out what we want to do with our lives, how we want to contribute. And so that's a neat aspect. But another thing that's happening that I'm seeing is that a lot of men are staying young, staying immature through their whole life. And they're playing the games that they played when they were young, when they're adults, even into their 40s, 50s, 60s, and later. And you can see them doing this when they don't get their way. Of course, I'm not saying I don't do these things. I struggle with this stuff as well. What does it take to get past immaturity? What does it take to get past that I'm going to play my games and figure out how to trick the system and get what I want and just fulfill my emotional needs and stick with my own little bubble of a paradigm of my world and have that be right instead of integrating with the rest of my species, let's just say? What keeps us immature? Well, a lot of it has to do with our comfort zone. We like being in the comfort zone. You notice how I said second day, everyone comes in? A lot of people in the same general area. They establish their little comfort zone. Next thing you know, the mind just kind of leads you right back in there. Did anyone really logic through why it would be a good idea to sit in the exact same area or within 10 or 20 feet? What'd you come up with?
I like the process of engaging.
Okay, so I like the process of engaging. Does that sound like logic to you? No! Was there any logic in there? No, it's I like. I love you, man. And not in a logical way either. But it's okay. I'm just throwing that out there. We're not going to do it anymore. But do you think that there would really be any logic behind any of these things? Underneath it all, there's some motive, there's some agenda, there's something. We're not really figuring out what we're doing with our lives. We're walking on these grooved paths that we've created in the past. What does it take to get past those things? What does it take? Let's talk more about those paths for a second. Once we get into them, right, the groove, it wears deeper, and it wears deeper, and it wears deeper, and the comfort zone gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And then the rationalization of the comfort zone gets deeper and more automatic and more automatic. And we carve this little space out in reality, physically, emotionally, and logically. And then we identify with it, and it becomes us. And it usually all started with a couple of seeds that were planted when you were young. You're not even aware of those anymore. And you would never want to look back and admit, we hate that idea of looking back and admitting, yeah, that game that I was playing when I was 4 is the exact same one I'm playing now. It's only much more sophisticated. It's like we take our powerful, intelligent minds that are miraculous, and we use them to create this complex story about why the game that we're playing is not really a game. And that's what we use it for all the time, is rationalizing our game and our myth and our story, and trying to fit our game into all the rest of the things that happen so that it doesn't seem too crazy or immature. What is immaturity and what is maturity? I'm not giving you the answers because I want to challenge you. I want you to figure it out. What is immaturity? Anyone? Not doing what you're asked to do. Apt to do. You know what? Let me try that again. Spell the word for me. H-A-V-E. Not doing what you have to do. What does have to do mean? Responsibility? Not taking responsibility? Yell it out.
Not being able to control your emotions.
Not being able to control your emotions?
Not evolving.
Not evolving?
Boy thinking.
Boy thinking?
Playing childish games without fear of consequences.
Playing childish games without fear of consequences. Low character. Yell it again. Lying to yourself. You're foreign related to me, aren't you? I'm not from your country, so bear with me. I guarantee you, whatever your native language is, you're much better at English than I am at yours, so work with me on this one. Self-deception, arguing? Arguing, fighting. How about this? How about one perspective on immaturity is dependence. Dependence. We all have some of this. Okay, I'm not saying this is something that ever goes away. But underneath everything that I ask anyone here, there's some level of dependence on something. The story, the reason, the justification, the identity. There's always dependence on something. You'll notice that essentially never are we, when someone is confronted with some serious issue that we're talking to them about here, do they relax and open and spontaneously come up with where they're coming from in the moment? Does this make sense? There's always some game, there's some rationale, there's some justification, there's something, there's some need to depend on something else. There's a lack of, I'm okay without any rules, without any laws, without a bunch of self-image, without being identified with something. Fritz Perls, who I mentioned in the last session, who founded Gestalt therapy and someone who was very influential on Werner Erhard and a lot of others, also very influential on neurolinguistic programming. He talks about maturity being the shift from dependence to independence. And independence in this case, roughly being defined as not needing any of that stuff. Being able to spontaneously, right here, come up with how I'm going to deal with this situation. It's kind of hard to conceptualize this when we've lived a whole life of depending on these rules and these roles and these models in our story and defending what we wanted to have be right and being in some camp and having the us's and the them's. Being identified with our thing, with our story. So how do we get from dependence, where I need my story and I have to rationalize and I have to have beliefs, and I've got to have my whole thing and my group and my psychology and my philosophy that I identify with and I defend, my comfort zone. How do we get from there over to here, where I can relax and I can be in the presence of any perspective? I can behave spontaneously. I can notice when my biases are coming up from childhood, from imprints, from emotional experiences. I can notice when my prejudices are popping up. I can feel them, and I can say, oh, there's one of them. Interesting. How's that shaping my perception right now? And then be honest, right, with our new definition, reporting your ongoing truth as it's happening, your ongoing experience. How do we get from there to here? Well, the transition comes by identifying your own blocks. Okay, we have to identify our block between here and there, like the road that gets from here to there. We've got to identify what's blocking us, and then we've got to try to remove the block. Now, what we all want to do is have someone else remove it. We want someone else to come in with their bulldozer and move the block out, or give me a pill that will take so I don't have to worry about it anymore. You just give me a shot and I go to sleep and I wake up and the block is gone. And one of the downsides of our culture, especially the media and very, very sophisticated marketing, we've been programmed that instant results are the way to go, that they're good, that you can get them. We've been programmed, hey, need more money? Refinance your house and borrow more than it's worth and go spend it on a bunch of stuff. That'll make you happier. I read in interesting book, can't remember. It was a book about, women and what they're experiencing growing up. And I don't remember the exact statistic right now, but it was very close to this. They asked teenage girls, women, on their way to womanhood, what was their number one favorite activity that made them the happiest? And like 90% of them reported shopping. Do you think that that's creating any challenges long term? Instant gratification combined with counterproductive behavior? What percentage of them do you think are using a credit card when they go out to fulfill that need? 90% of the 90%? It's like Anchorman. 60% of the time, it works every time. So we now have a fundamental challenge. We're over here at immature, dependent, don't want to even see that. We want to just have this image that we're better than everybody else and we get it, and because I can intellectualize about it, I can do it. How do we get from there over to here, right? To dependent. The road, there's a block. There's something there that's preventing us from getting to the next level, but it's our block. Now, there are categories of blocks. Okay, there are general dynamics. With some of them we can learn to understand, and we can get some tools to help us, but we have to do our own work. And that's something that in our instant gratification culture, we don't want to hear. I don't want to know that I've got to do my work. I want you to do it for me. I want to walk in one way and walk out another. Now, my commitment is you are going to have walked in one way into this program and walk out another by the time you're finished. But I'm going to convince you to take responsibility and to do the work and to find your own path, because I'm convinced that you'll get a lot more from it if you do. You can get a little bit if you learn some techniques, and sure, you can get some great transformation if you learn some great techniques and get some great results. But to really go to the next level, to become self-sufficient as an individual and as a man, it's important to develop the ability to see your games and to see the block, and then go to work on removing the block, and then go to work on getting yourself up to the next level. And then this becomes a spiral staircase where it just gets to the next level and the next, and you find one block after another after another. Does this make sense? I'm going to ask the question again. How do we do that? What's the bridge? What removes the block? Frustration is what helps you remove the block. Intentionally facing frustration and overcoming it yourself. There's a guy named Frank Farrelly who wrote a book called Provocative Therapy. This book was recommended to me by my mentor Jerry years ago. Most people are not familiar with Frank Farrelly. In fact, who in this room knows who Frank Farrelly is, maybe has read his book, right? Like what, 6, 7 people out of 300 and some odd? How many of you didn't hear about Frank Farrelly from me? Didn't hear about him, did not hear about Frank Farrelly from me. Hang on a sec. Let's see if we can get this straight, because I asked that incorrectly. How many people have read Frank Farrelly's book but did not hear about him from me originally? Read his book but didn't hear about him from me. Okay, so a different set of people raised their hand this time, which is really interesting. So either you weren't listening the first time or you're just lying to me and yourself. And lying is fun. But thanks for helping me prove my point, guys. I really appreciate that. It made it really nice and simple. The point I'm trying to make is, let's say that a handful, 6 people out of 300 or something have heard of him, which is very, very few. Not many people have ever heard of this guy. And he developed a system of interaction with people, is the way I think of it, that is incredibly powerful. And the reason he called it provocative therapy was that what he was trying to do was provoke the client, the subject, provoke them into overcoming their own stuff. In Radical Honesty, Brad Blanton talks about this same idea. Fritz Perls, when he talks about the impasse, he talks about skillfully frustrating the client so that they see where their block is, and they wake up from it and they go, oh, right, I'm getting frustrated. There must be something going on in here to trigger that in me. Maybe I should look into that and see what that is. But that's not what we normally do. When we get frustrated in life, when we get ticked off, when something triggers one of our emotions, we intellectualize and we think, oh, you know what? That person's wrong, first of all. Anyone would be frustrated. My frustration is justifiable. So we immediately go right into avoidance. We don't take any responsibility for it. And if we do get freaked out about something, it's the fact that we didn't have the ability to control our emotion. We're uncomfortable because we couldn't control it. Now, what is that going to do? That's just going to make the problem worse. Because you're not recognizing where it's coming from. You're not recognizing the wisdom of your animal. That intellectual mind that's been programmed by a lot of things that you didn't put in there is now trying to wrestle control back because it's uncomfortable. It doesn't like this frustration, and it's blaming somebody else probably or some external circumstance. Is this too abstract for you? Do you understand what I'm talking about here? Is anyone confused? Is anyone frustrated? Good. Why are you frustrated?
There's a whole lot of stuff. As soon as you start explaining this.
Do you want to come over to the mic real quick, please? Can I just make a comment before you talk?
Sure.
There's a group conversation that's going on here in this program. We are creating a drama together that's playing itself out. Pay attention to what's happening right now. Stay with it. All right.
Well, the frustration is that here clearly you have something that I mean, it goes back to the conversations we were having yesterday. Here clearly you're on the cusp of something. It's like, oh, I can kind of see what's going on there. Keep hitting a wall, and you're trying to look at it from different angles to see what that wall is, but you can't tell what it is.
Do you want to know what it is?
Clearly.
Do you want to get through it?
Of course.
Do we have a mic? Will you grab this mic and come join me up here for a couple of minutes?
Sure.
We're just going to rename this program Chris and Greg Transformation. Okay, talk to me a little bit about where you're at personally right now.
Specifically?
Related to the question of frustration.
Well, whenever you were talking earlier, essentially about these things that cause you to get frustrated, and you stop from it. You're like, hey, is this too abstract? Yeah, I definitely think there's an abstract element to it, because this block that you're talking about, it's like you're sort of like inching around it, but you can't tell, what it is, so you don't know what to do about it.
It's like someone's got you in a headlock from behind and you can't even see who it is. You're like, how do I get out of this thing, and who's got me anyway? Right? When you said that in that way, where you said it's like there's a wall and you start to kind of see it, but you can't see what it is and what's behind it, that was one of almost the most elegant ways I've heard this whole process described. You know there's something there. You can start to sense it, and you can start to see the wall, and then your curiosity starts to build, like, what could be over there? Do I even want to look? In Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, Joseph Campbell wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces. In that book, he talks about his studies traveling the world and studying world religion and finding that there's this common story that runs through everything. And in The Hero's Journey, in the beginning, the hero has to set out on their own, in this case, on his own, to find his own path in life. Joseph Campbell says, in the tale of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, when the knights went out to find the Holy Grail, each of them entered the woods on their own in a path where it was darkest. Had to go out on their own to find their own path, and they go through a whole process and go through trials and tribulations. And at the end of the game, okay, I'm going to fast forward, at the end of the game, when they finally realize what the thing is, they realize their destiny, the thing that they came to get in life, and it's right there, and they can claim it. They have the awakening that if they do claim it, it's going to mean something totally different than what they thought it was going to mean. And then they have to make the real decision. Do they want it? The thing that they'd wanted their whole life, the thing that has been their purpose. And if they choose to take it, their whole life changes, and they can't go back. And if they choose not to take it, their whole life changes, and they can't go back. And so when you have the wall there, and you can see there's something starting to materialize, I can see the wall, what could be behind there? There's a part of us that knows that if we choose to look, if we stick with the process and we look, we're not going to be able to go back. We're not going to be able to claim ignorance anymore. We're not going to be able to just keep acting and doing the thing that we were doing mindlessly and say, I didn't know. And that's a scary thing, because when you've been able to do the thing you've been doing your whole life, or for years mindlessly, and you've got your justification for it, and behind that wall is probably something that's going to take away my justification. That's tough. It's tough to keep going and to go look behind the wall. So let's try a little process here. Do you have a challenge that you run into consistently with women?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go into a specific zone here. Have you dated women that you would consider to be really amazing?
Yes.
Have you had relationships with those types of women?
A few.
Okay. Within those relationships with really the higher quality women, within the bounds of that relationship, do you have any consistent challenges or frustrations?
Yes.
Give me one of them.
What I've found is that anytime I'm in a situation where it is a high quality girl that I feel like is long-term potential, a lot of stuff starts to come up, and a lot of that has to do with my purpose and how I'm not entirely clear on it yet, and it's a whole different set of things that begin to bubble up. But what's in the background of my head with girls that I'm casually interested in versus these girls, it's a totally different set of things. Suddenly all this stuff starts to come up, and I start to think about it on a regular basis, like, well, I don't have a purpose, or my purpose isn't as clear, and how far along am I on my purpose, and what am I bringing to the table? What am I bringing to the table here? There's a variety of that stuff that sort of I pretty much starts running in the background all the time, and then of course it distorts how I act. And
within the relationship,
okay,
with the evolved women, with the
yes.
Let's pick the three best, the 2-3 best.
Okay.
What's something that's been consistent within them that's come up that's been a challenge within those relationships?
Well, I'd mentioned purpose for a reason, because I feel like if I don't have that, I feel like my core gets thrown off a little bit, because there's a lot of tests coming.
Okay.
And
Give me something that happens when the tests come and the core gets thrown off. What do you do that maybe you wouldn't want to talk about right now?
nice. Well, I react, and it might
How?
be even.
Give me the one main way you react, the one big one that you go, oh man. I'll give you an example. In my last relationship, which we'll see, this is a story that has been playing itself out for about 2.5 years now. There's someone that I'm very close to, and she and I have been together and apart and together and apart, and we stay very, very close friends wherever the relationship is. And, oh man, it would be good if she was here so you could meet her and she could come up here and we could talk about it, because I think you'd get a lot out of it. But I've run into a challenge with her that has also come up a couple of times in other relationships, but never at this level. And it is that she is much more spirited in terms of, if she disagrees with something that I have to say, she will just stop me right in the middle of what I'm saying and just go, no, that's stupid. I disagree completely. And I haven't really dealt with that in the past. And at first, I would kind of say, well, how can you disagree completely? You haven't heard me all the way out yet. So, what are you doing? I'm not even attached to my idea. I don't care whether you disagree or not. I just want to get my idea across. Like, well, I disagree. And first it was okay, but then it started to get to the point where I started to respond and react emotionally to it and get triggered by it, to where she could just disagree with something, and instead of me saying, hey, why would you disagree? You haven't even heard me all the way out. Let me just finish what I'm saying and just kind of work through it. It dug through everything, and it got to a more primal button inside of me, something that came from a younger time in my life that I've had to face. And it got to the point where my fuse got very short, and she'd disagree with something, and I would immediately just say, why would, just the emotion comes out. What are you doing? And we'd get into our thing, and all the way through it, I'd defend my position of, I'm trying to wake you up. I'm trying to get you to stop just, doing this thing automatically. But I had to go through my process of realizing whatever she's got going on is her stuff, and we've all got stuff. But we found something inside of me that I would not want to ever admit in public. I wouldn't want to admit to myself. I haven't seen in a long time, but it's still in there. And I'm not in control of that part of me. She can reach in and just push that button, and I get emotionally upset and angry and frustrated and blaming and all the things that I try to teach people not to do. how the hell does this happen? I had to go through it. Anyway, I just wanted to give you that to kind of make space that, hey, we've all got these things.
Yeah, and I've found that whenever you are emotionally invested with someone, it seems like those buttons, they start to come out. They start to come out of the...
So did you hear the word? Whenever you are emotionally invested, right? That's where we are. That's what's going on. Okay, so anyway, please continue.
Yeah, no, I have found that in these situations, these particular girls are good at finding those buttons. And
those kind of girls are. Yeah, they always are.
And either it be a split second to where like I react and like, oh, you tricked me, you got me. And that's it seems like that's all they need. As long as they get that look in your eye and then that realization you get afterwards, like, oh, I reacted, and that's it. It doesn't even matter if it doesn't even matter if I say anything about it or do anything about it, as long as they get that little reaction there. And
what pisses you off more, the fact that it bothers you, or the fact that they get to have that little nanny, I got you? Who can relate to what this man is talking about here? Which part pisses you off more?
It actually makes me angry that it bothers me that's still there, because it's something I've been working through. It's something
Which part? The fact that in you or them?
In me.
You, okay.
The fact that comes up without me having there's not enough of a pause.
Yeah, I get it.
So
on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does that bug you? And how much does the fact that she gets to kind of be like, oh, I gotcha, bug you?
Well, I almost don't even in the moment it bothers me, because again because it's still there.
Which, I mean, so we've got the part that you respond and you get triggered, but then you've got the fact that she gets to see it and go, oh, okay, I know what's going on here. I've still got you by the whatever what she's got you by. In the moment, when you're there, when it's happening, which one is the one that bothers you more? You?
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
It bothers me a lot. I would say a 10.
Okay, and then how much does it bother you that she gotcha in the moment when it happens?
Maybe a 5.
5?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're both pretty good?
Yeah.
But not nearly as much.
No, not so much. And I feel like in these situations, I mean, this is minutia here, but I feel like in these situations, she doesn't want that to happen.
That's the frustrating part, isn't it? That's a real extra that's the little extra knife in the side. She doesn't want to be able to do that to you.
And then and after it happens, even just a couple of times, there's a shift and there's a decline. It's weird how that works, but it has happened consistently with the girls, I would say, of quality that I've met.
Good. So, and thank you for being honest. Thank you for that. So let's now go back in your life. Can you remember a time where something may have happened with someone when you were younger on a consistent basis, or it might have just happened once, but it probably happened on a consistent basis, where they could do something, say something, and it triggered anger and frustration inside of you that might in some way be related to this? And can you think of the earliest one you can think of?
Well, I'm tempted to think of a variety of people in my family that have affected me emotionally as I was growing up. I don't know that one in particular really pops out. Can
you think of one experience that was like this, that might just bubble up as you go back and think?
Okay.
Is there some?
I mean, I'll throw one out.
Okay.
I was raised by a single parent, and my uncle actually has been essentially a father figure as I was getting a little bit older, and I would say that he's kind of I don't want to say domineering in the sense, but he was very very controlling. He really wanted good things to happen for us in our life, but he was very critical of things. And at a pretty young age, I would say I developed an emotional response to that.
Okay.
And
can you remember one experience that was particularly?
Yeah, there's not one. I mean, I don't even know if this is like. It's tough to say whether it's even significant. I don't know that one is really popping out as something that's really been that big of a deal.
But there's
But, I
one.
mean,
We're just looking for a representative one.
Okay.
Can you just remember one that was? I mean, right now I can remember. I'm doing it. I'm trying to do this myself in my, in my own space here, because I also think that a lot of mine is related to my relationship with my father, who was also very controlling. And last year I went and saw my father and his mother. And his mother was very controlling, and her father was very controlling, and we all talked about it, and we brought my girlfriend in, and we all talked about it together. It was like, whoa. But so when I go back and I think about it, I think, okay, so when was an experience when I was younger? And I can remember a time when my father was being what I perceived to be very controlling, and I was responding to it, and I was probably 13 or something. And I remember looking at him and feeling so controlled, and just like there was nothing that I could do. And I remember this idea of, and I said to him, I said, do you realize that what you're doing right now, when I get old enough to leave, I'm going to leave and I'm not going to come back. That's what's going to happen here. I don't know how I had the presence of mind to say this when I was like 13. And essentially that's what happened. And for a long time, I got to hold on to, I got to tell him. So that I got to extend that whole game through a whole part of my life, and it like froze me there. But I won't go into the experience of, like what happened and some of the other things, but I can remember an experience that happened there, and then the thing, and I can remember the whole game. It just bubbles up an experience for me. Do you have anything that?
It's interesting. Yesterday, I think when someone was up here speaking, and he had mentioned about how like he had gotten some money. And his mom was like, "Oh, you should spend it on that."
Yeah.
Whenever I was younger, my mom still had a lot of trouble with the divorce and was still talking about it. She was running the story over and over and over again. Even with strangers that she would meet, she would start talking about it and such. So
It's very attractive.
Yeah, yeah. No, she.
No, we don't even realize we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's just so traumatic. We just have to get it out. Yeah.
But I'm the same things would happen. I'd get money from my relatives and be like, "Oh, well, you should give that to me," or you should. Oh, well, she would start bringing up my dad about how he was greedy, and if I kept it, I'd be greedy too. And there was there's a variety of stuff happening. I mean,
Can you remember one of them that triggered that feeling that's similar to the feeling that you'd get when you were interacting with those women that you were in that relationship with?
I really want to say that this thing, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like this thing with the relationship with the women, I feel like it's new. The way that my strings were pulled whenever I was younger and whenever I was a teenager, this is different. I feel like it's far more subtle. Before I would react emotionally and I would think about it, and it would be a long process, and maybe I would. With this, it's very like it bubbles up from the unconscious and then it retracts.
Yeah.
It's different. So I don't know if I can make a comparison.
Well, that's kind of like you almost gave like the textbook definition of it can't be new. If that's how it's working.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
You with me? Like those things that bubble way up and then you just respond and then you go, whoa, and then that's what I'm trying to find is can you even just intuitively, not in a logical way at all, but can you intuitively find a time when you went through something that is in any way similar when you were younger, maybe even very young, that just pushed your button and frustrated you, and then you had to cope with it and you didn't really get to work it all the way out?
Yeah, I feel like I'm having trouble making connections with. They seem so different, but
is there something that when you were younger that maybe triggered a feeling of frustration?
Well,
How about this? Let's get a little more specific then to help you find it. With the women, what would you describe the emotion as? What label would you put on it, the one that you're feeling? The thing that gets triggered when it comes up.
I want to say it's a flavor of insecurity. Maybe it's a flavor of oh you got me, or maybe it's a flavor of.
What happens? Is it defensiveness? Is it anger? Is it blame? Is it sadness? Is it guilt? Like, what is the emotion that's happening? Could you put a label on the?
I would say it's insecurity. I mean, I think does that
No, there's
count
an
on the spectrum?
emotion. I think that insecurity is a label that you'd put on, it's a judgment.
Okay.
How do you behave when this happens? What happens? What's the manifestation of it? Do you yell? Do you cry?
Well, if let's say right here you were to say something that was offensive to me, and I didn't expect it, I would kind of freeze up, and then I'd calm down. So you have that freezing where you're just like, oh, he got me. Okay, let me not react, and then calm down.
So in other words, you don't respond emotionally in these situations. It's a freezing.
A little bit, yeah. Freezing is probably a better way of putting it.
Fascinating. Okay. So this is better. I was projecting onto you my stuff here. So that's why I think we're having some trouble.
Okay.
So when you've dealt with these, let's just call them 2 or 3 kind of evolved women, they'll do something that's a test or to mess with you or whatever, and you'll freeze and not respond. And then you'll relax and you'll kind of have that, you got me.
Regain my composure, essentially.
Okay. So in other words, there's no anger, there isn't yelling and screaming, there's no crying, there isn't any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, but it's interesting though. I feel like the tone changes. Like I feel like I lose power. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. Do you get upset in your life? Do you get angry? Do you cry? Do you yell, scream? Do you do any of that stuff?
No.
No?
Not so much.
Pretty much never.
Yeah.
So the furthest you go is freeze.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're making progress here, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, I'm trying to fit you into this little framework that I've got that's convenient to try to work with the group on. So thank you for working with me on that. I'm trying to make this a group, lesson at the same time, or else we would have had a little different conversation that would have been a lot more specific. I'm trying to kind of keep it general. Can you remember a time in your past when something would happen that would get through and push your button and you would freeze in response to it?
Yes. No, I think this opens up a lot of things. I think a variety of things that have, I
want the oldest one.
The oldest one.
The one that you can remember that's the most, if we could call it primary, that you can come up with.
Does that have to be a specific event?
It would be good if you had a specific event, one that really stamped something in your brain that just comes up, whatever it is.
I would say anytime that, especially whenever I was young, anytime I was really confronted with something, my reaction would be to
Can you remember something you were confronted with that was really uncomfortable? I know that this is weird, but...
Yeah, for some reason, specifics are hard, but I can think of, for example, going to visit my uncle and him bring something up, and my uncle, again, he would get angry about something, and my reaction would be to freeze up because I didn't know how to handle it.
What were you trying to do when you were freezing?
I feel like maybe I was trying to smooth the waters. Or maybe I was just trying to. I don't even know if it's a conscious thing that I was trying to do.
No, it wasn't conscious. I'm saying now that you've grown into a. I've listened to you have conversations and so forth. You've grown into a very educated, intelligent, sensitive person. Like you're a different person now, so to speak. You've added a lot. Can you look back with the more evolved, more mature you that you are now and say, oh, I see what I was trying to do then?
It feels like whenever I look back at it, it's just paralysis.
Okay. But what was the paralysis to accomplish? Were you trying to
make it stop?
Get his approval? Were you trying to defend yourself? Were you trying to protect something? Trying to make it go away?
Yeah, to make it stop. Or it felt like indecision, didn't know how to react. I didn't have a stance, so I would just...
Can you describe the emotion you might have been feeling then, from this perspective?
Yeah, it would definitely be frustration. It would definitely be sort of a feeling of helplessness.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Do you like feeling helpless?
Not at all.
Yeah. Is it possible that when you're interacting with women now and they trigger that, is it possible that helpless comes up?
I'm sure there's a little bit of that, yeah. Or there is some of that, yeah.
Have you ever considered it? Have you ever considered that you feel helpless when that happens?
No.
Maybe not. Okay. Whatever it is, okay, what we're going through is a process right now. Because one of the questions that came up a lot yesterday in one way or another was, how do you find your own thing? How do you find the block? Where do you even start on this stuff, right? So what I'm doing right now, and I hope you're going through this process yourself, what I'm trying to do is give you a roadmap to find your own blocks. And what we do is we start with where, when we're interacting with evolved women, where do we get our buttons pushed? And you may have not been in a relationship with the type of woman that you'd like to have ultimately. You may not have had an intimate relationship, even just friendships, even the women in your family that you really like. Where is the problem happening? Where are you getting triggered in some way, consistently? And then what we want to do is ask ourselves, what are you feeling? What's going on then? Can you see what the challenge is? Then go back and ask, where in your past, as young as you can remember, did you have something like that happen that made an impression on you? And one event. See if that'll come up for you. And then ask, what were you feeling? What was the emotion you were feeling? A lot of us have not learned to identify our emotions. We haven't learned to put words on them and say, oh, that's what that is. Farmer on my team and I were talking when we were preparing for another program last year, and he said, distinctions and having words for them helps the mind to be able to perceive things. So in America, we've got only a couple of words for cheese and the different flavors of cheese, but in France they have like 17 different characteristics of cheese and subtle words for them and descriptions. And the French can taste all of these things, but Americans can't. We can't taste the thing because we were never taught the distinction. A lot of times, us men, we didn't get taught the distinctions. We, in a lot of cases, we were raised by our mom, and we had, a dad around sometimes, or a stand-in dad, or whatever, and we just didn't get all the wiring connected correctly. We didn't get the transition into manhood that we maybe needed to get. We didn't learn to process through our emotions. You and I have something. What were you going to say?
I think my issue is, from what we were talking about earlier, is that whenever I try to tag these things to things that happened in my past, I feel like there's this feeling like it's almost arbitrary in the sense that there's shots in the dark. I mean, I feel like my uncle yelling at me versus the bully on the playground versus all of these things.
Yeah.
There's a whole gambit of things that happened that that triggered emotions in me. And
so can I speak to what you're saying here? Because I was going to say something that might, right about then. You and I have something in common, I think, and I'm generalizing and judging you as I say this, and assuming that I get you. But we have something in common, I think, called we really never got how to deal with our emotions or really learned about emotions and integrated them very much. I've been listening to your language over the last couple of days and the things that you've been saying. And even just when we were doing our brainstorming here, you yelled out, maturity is controlling emotions, right? That was your comment. I don't know that if you go right to controlling emotions without understanding and integrating them, that you've actually matured. It doesn't sound to me, and this is me, by the way, I'm talking to you as me, it doesn't sound to me like you've gone through learning about your emotions and flowing with them and integrating them into your life, like three brains, physical, emotional, logical. It doesn't sound to me like you've integrated it as a third of your life, as a rich landscape to explore and help use within your world.
Okay.
Right? It sounds like when strong emotions come up, you immediately come up in the head and go, that is something to be controlled. That is something to be harnessed. I've got to throw the halter on that thing and, break it kind of thing. And again, I'm talking to myself as I say this, okay? So let me keep going down this path here, because where we went to is we go back early and we see, okay, where did something happen to us that seems to be related to this thing in some way? What's the early version of that seemed to trigger it when I was younger? And then say, what was that emotion that I was feeling? And you'll notice here that it was very hard to get a name on the emotion. We're not hearing, I get angry, I get frustrated, I get sad, I feel depressed. It took a while to get to that emotion of hopeless. That's what it was, right? Helpless. It took a while to get to helpless, not hopeless, helpless. Does he strike you as the type of person that is helpless? All right, watch this. Are you a helpless person?
No.
Do you think there's a connection here? Have you spent the last couple of decades of your life making damn sure that you are never helpless?
Sure.
Am I psychic? I wish I was sometimes. No. Now, being a person that is not helpless at all, I'll tell you, I haven't met, everyone here in this room, but if some shit were to go down in my life, all right, something bad were to happen, and I needed someone that was level-headed and could sit down with me and figure out what we need to do, organize a bunch of people and resources and take action, this is the guy that I would want with me. That's the guy I'd want with me, because he's worked through so many things in his life to become incredibly resourceful so he is never helpless. He's the guy that I would want to have right here next to me, okay? If I was a total 10 of a woman, it would be a different story, because she's looking for something a little bit different. Now, it probably, as a guy who's spent a lot of time in his life making sure he's never going to be helpless, ever, and I can't tell you this, doing it unconsciously, without awareness that that's what's happening. That's just the way life is and the way it's supposed to be. That's what you do. It's the right thing to do, unconsciously. And then have me sit here and dissect him and simplify, it's almost an affront to his intelligence and power. We don't want to hear that. We don't want to think that it's that simple. We never want to think that it's that simple. We're too complex. And you know what? You even heard it. When I think about it, I think I had all these different emotional experiences when I was young. It just doesn't make sense that I would connect one to the other. It's too simplistic. It's got to be more complex than that. And it is more complex than that. But it's simpler than that too. So this is where we start. This is where you start. Who's getting a better idea of where to start and how to progress? Raise your hand. Who's still a little bit fishy on it? Who's still not quite getting where to start? Okay, good. Only a few folks. Good. Thank you for being honest, by the way, guys. Thank you. And thank you very much. I really appreciate. Thank you very much. No, you're not leaving yet. Can you see how Greg's process has a direct impact on the interactions that he was having with Chris? Can you see now how who he is plugs into what was going on between he and Chris? More. Does it all make sense more? Okay. Who here, before he came up on stage right now, was listening to how he was interacting with Chris and was saying, oh, dude, if you just do this one thing, you'd get it. I can see you're just almost right. Who was seeing that while he was right next to breakthrough? Okay. Now, who, now that you understand him better and you can appreciate him as a human being a little bit more, who now goes, oh, now I understand why you were doing it that way? Right? Aha. Oh, yeah. Now, once I know who you are, once I understand you better, it all makes sense to me. Now that you understand him, if you want to talk to him about what was going on with Chris, and you communicate to him, you know what, I get you a little bit now, build a little rapport, he'll be able to hear you. He wouldn't have been able to before because you didn't understand him, and you'd be talking from your world and not from his. You know what? Let's pause here because you good keeping the drama going through the whole thing?
All right, let's do it.
Awesome, thank you. So that's gonna be your installment of the Greg Show.
Good
Awesome, thank you. Chris, where you at? You want to come up here and talk to me for a minute? Welcome, Chris. There you go. Are you good with everything that's happening right now?
Yeah, it's cool.
Do you understand Greg better?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah? Was that an interesting insight?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have a lot of admiration for you, by the way, after listening to the conversations that we've been having the last couple of days. You've helped me have a couple of insights by being honest and sticking with, where you were coming from. Particularly, by the way, when you said, I've watched a lot of relationships now, because it seems like this is something you're concerned about. You're thinking long-term in your life, and that's something I really admire. Most men are not thinking long-term. They're not thinking end game. They're not thinking, how does what I'm doing today impact the long-term? But you said, in your own observation, men who have had a lot of different experiences with a lot of different types of women, that later if they have a great relationship and then there's a problem, and then they maybe go to therapy or whatever, that those other relationships come up and create complexity. I thought, wow, that is a really interesting insight. That was a huge aha for me. It was something I'd never thought of, never featured, and I could immediately see how it could happen. It's a long-term implication. Very interesting insight. Because I'm not necessarily into making big judgments and like changing my whole life based on one realization and just kind of continuing to flow and live moment to moment, I don't put any more significance on that than most insights that I have. They kind of have different levels of insight, but I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to thank you for that just as part of the conversation, because it was really just fascinating, something I'd never heard of before, so thank you. In your relationships with women, especially the type of woman that you would consider to be this total 10, a woman of maturity, integrity, really has her life together emotionally, knows who she is, attractive inside and outside, and maybe it's women that you've had relationships with, girlfriend relationships, maybe it's women that are in your family. Again, I don't really care. Can you think of, maybe 3 of them that you've had relationships with, and an issue that comes up between you and them consistently that is some type of challenge for you?
Right. My last girlfriend, and I would definitely consider her what I was looking for, the total 10.
Yeah.
And I just totally blew it in pretty much every way possible.
Good for you.
So
That's how we learn.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, I've always been very logical and reasoning and rationale based and philosophical, and she would always attack my philosophical reasoning with emotional appeal, and it would drive me insane. And one time, she just destroyed me and was being incredibly emotional, and I just wanted to smack her. I was really angry. And
I just have admiration for this guy. I just got to tell you, thank you for being honest. So you were being rational and philosophical and logical, and she was being emotional, okay? Whatever all those things mean. And you got to the point, you said she was, you used the words emotional appeal.
yeah.
Can you describe that to me?
Basically, we were getting into some argument about morality, and she said, well, you always make it sound more black and white than it is. And I said, well, I know there's shades of gray. And she's like, well, what about morality just being what you feel? If something feels good. And then she started going off on this little rant. She was playing the devil's advocate with me because she had the same belief I did.
Huh.
But she's like, you need to be able to understand the other person's perspective better. And I was clearly not being very empathetic. So she was trying to force me to be empathetic by arguing really strongly that, well, it feels good, and it feels good to me, so that means it's right. in my opinion, and it was driving me insane the way she was arguing it, and she was just going off feelings, and this is how it is, and I was like, well, this is rationally doesn't make sense, and I was trying to not experience what she was trying to get me to experience. Instead, I was trying to dissect what she was saying and turn it into a logical argument, which didn't work. And the more I did that, the more she like attacked me, and it was really frustrating.
Do you know why she was upset with you?
I think she just wanted me to be able to be empathetic and to try to understand, because I wasn't doing that in other areas of the relationship as well.
Wrong.
No?
Try again.
Why she was upset with me.
Yeah. Why was she getting so angry and emotional and pissed at you? Why was she messing with you? Because you're stuck in your head. Right?
Yeah.
That's what she was upset about, because you weren't feeling. And you don't know how very well.
Right. Which is why I'm glad you brought me up yesterday, because that was the number one thing I wanted to get out of this whole program is empathy, and to be able to feel rather than just always be stuck in my head.
You're pretty far from it, but we'll get you there.
Yeah.
Now, isn't it fascinating that this key issue that he dealt with in this relationship, which is probably representative of something you've dealt with many times in these types of relationships, had to do with him arguing morality and her feeling like it's not black and white, it's something that you decide moment to moment based on how you feel about the situation. And him saying, no, intellectually, it is a black or white thing. Do you have any more insight about what was going on in the conversation in the last sessions now? Very interesting. Okay, so can you remember a time then, but what would you describe that emotion as that you felt when you wanted to smack her, when you're just like, ah?
I was pretty angry.
Anger, okay.
Yeah.
So the dynamic, generally speaking, was you had an emotional woman that you respected. You were arguing about something where she was emotional and you were being logical, and you became angry in response. And you felt a physical rage come up. Right?
Right.
Good for you for controlling yourself. And sometimes it's a good thing to control yourself. Can you remember a time when you were younger, back maybe early on, where there was maybe a female figure in your life who you really respected, who was emotionally freaking out, and you were in your head intellectually arguing and getting angry?
Definitely. I think that happened with my mom quite a bit.
Can you remember the earliest experience you can recall?
There's one experience, I don't remember all the details, but I wanted to go to a baseball game, watch the Mariners play the Dodgers. It was like the first interleague play or something, and I was pretty young. And she said that I couldn't for some...
About how old?
But I was like 6th grade or something.
Okay.
For some bogus reason, I don't remember why. And I got really mad at her and started throwing these pillows at her, and she got really mad at me and then grounded me. And
do you notice that even when he was, how old were you, 12 or something, 11?
Right.
He remembers that it was a bogus reason. He remembers that she had bad reasoning then. Was she potentially making just an emotional decision?
Most likely, that's usually what she does.
Okay. And was there any control involved in that emotional decision, trying to control you?
Probably, certainly.
Did you feel that?
Yeah, I think that's probably why I reacted the way that I did.
Okay. And do you remember how the argument went at all? I'm just curious because this is fascinating.
Probably what happened was, if you keep acting this way, I'm not going to let you go. This type of argument, you're having an attitude with me. I'm like, no, I'm not having an attitude with you. And then I was trying to explain to her what this attitude would manifest itself, or how it would manifest itself. And then
at 11, he was probably using the word manifest. Mother, do you realize the irrationality of your argument?
And then she's like, you're having that attitude with me again. And then and then she said, so you can't go to the baseball game. And then I got mad and threw the pillows.
What do you think your mother meant by you're having that attitude with me? Where do you think she was coming from?
I can't remember what I did to trigger that first, you're having that attitude with me, so.
No, it doesn't matter. Where do you think she was coming from, though? Imagine you're her, looking at you, a 12-year-old, who's basically saying, Mom, you're not as intellectually powerful as me, and you're being irrational, and I'm right.
Yeah. I was probably a bit of a brat, was what she was thinking.
And someone that is not in the intellectual realm, not in the head realm, is in the emotion, totally in the flow of emotion at all time, making intuitive, emotional decisions. Where do you think she was coming from?
That I was disrespecting her power and not trying to relate to her properly.
Probably so. But she probably also, maybe, just from her perspective, right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't know. And I don't know if I'm even right here. I'm just trying to throw out some possibilities so that you can get a wedge in there and start imagining what it's like to be on this different plane of existence. For a really intellectual man, a really emotional woman, they're fascinated by it, but they're also, there's a whole part of them that's like, can see that you don't get this whole realm. They can see that you don't have that circuitry on inside of you. And when you're just in your head and you're just making logic decisions, you're missing out on the richness of life that emotions can bring. And you're missing out on this whole other piece that can help you make much better decisions, can help you relate to people better. Really emotional people, in a lot of cases, they understand that life and success in life is largely a result of your relationships and your ability to have relationships with other people. No great success has ever come without incredible networks of relationships and trust and bonds and all this kind of thing. And emotional people, in a lot of ways, they know this on an intuitive level. They just get it. And so when they run into someone that's all head, they get upset. It's like you're missing this thing and you're stuck in your head and you're trying to do that head thing to control me. Now, we could probably go back and, who knows? Your mom's dad was probably an intellectual guy who used his intellect to be controlling with your mother. I'm making this up right now. And she was, when she was young, she was like pushing against that with her emotion. And then you show up, you're just like her dad, or, who knows? There's all these games are playing out. When I sat down with my dad, my grandmother, and my kind of ex-girlfriend, and we were all talking about this, I asked a question that I'd never asked before. I said, Grandma, tell me about your father. Never thought to ask that one in 37 years of life. She said, Now again, keep in mind, my father, very controlling, my grandmother, very controlling, totally unconscious about it. She said, he was a monster. She said when I was, I think 17, he picked up this huge glass bowl and just threw it at me because he was mad at me, and it shattered and it like ripped my arm open. I had to go to the hospital, and he went to jail for a few years over it. And that was just one of many instances. And when I saw that, my whole relationship with my father and with his relationship with her was all reframed, because I thought that what they did was horrible and controlling. As soon as I saw that, I was like, what a miracle that you turned out so good. See, in the context, when you understand it, everything starts to make sense. But when you're telling your story and you're making up your story of what's going on, you can't see that. Okay? Good. So, can you relate to what's happening here? Can you see the pattern that we're doing, that we're unfolding here? We're looking at our relationships with evolved women and where we run into a challenge. We're trying to get in touch with, especially as men, is there an emotion that's coming up? And And then we're going back, trying to see, is there a time, and especially with a woman, sometimes with a man, is there a time when you can remember having this experience early on, or something that would be like it? And what were you feeling then? What were you feeling then? Because when you're young, if you're feeling a feeling that you don't want to feel, and that can imprint you to do whatever it takes to move away from that feeling for the rest of your life. And you can be asleep. And especially if you're a real intellectual guy like Chris and Greg and myself, then you get this mind trip like, okay, it was an emotion, so I have to dominate this stuff. I have to control these things. And and then you get removed from it, and when emotions come up, they're bad, and you really get far from labeling them and integrating them. And what effect does that have when you come upon a total 10, a woman that is integrated and gets her emotional side? Is it possible that when she sees that, she can read that like a book and know what that means, just get it without having to think about it or whatever? Oh, you're wounded and stuck in your head. And that when she's getting upset with you and being emotional, is it possible that it doesn't have anything to do with who's right or wrong or the issue or any of that stuff? And is it possible that it's not about trying to understand her and empathize with her, that isn't the game at all? Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. Who's learning something? Good. So for you, first part, step 1. Think about where you've had relationships with evolved women that really you respect, admire, the kind that might be a total 10. List a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them. Now think back. Is there something that comes up? Is there a challenge that rears its ugly head with you, where you reach a block with them of some kind that is consistently happening? And what happens? What do you do? What's your response? What gets triggered? Can you identify at all the emotion? Yeah, maybe not. Go back. Look earlier in your life. See if you can find the earliest version that you can find. The thing that intuitively comes up. It might not seem like it's connected, but just it pops up. It's like your powerful unconscious mind goes back through millions and millions and millions of memories, and something just pops up. There's just a connection somehow, as if a dream. Pick that one and look at it. Play it. See what was happening. See if you can get in touch with the emotion you were feeling. That emotion that you were feeling is so key. Can you name it? And not an emotion like, I didn't like it, because that's not an emotion. Was it anger? Was it fear? Was it horror? Was it rage? Was it sadness? Was it frustration? What was it? What was that little guy feeling? That little guy, what was he feeling? And then can you see how what happened in that moment and potentially subsequent moments after that began to shape that little guy's perception of the right way to do things and what he needed to do to protect himself? Who's having an insight right now into your own life? Who's having a one that would really help the group? Like you could see a lot of guys could relate to it. Can we get a couple right over here and a couple right over here? A couple are 20. Somewhere in that rough neighborhood.
Hey.
Talk to me.
It's kind of difficult to...
Stop for a second. Talk to me, and he laughed. Why did he laugh? No. No. Why is he laughing? I'm guessing right now. But I think he's laughing because he's like, there it is. It's been there the whole damn time. It's been right in front of me.
It was partially that and partially just nervous laughter.
All right, well, I'm stupid. Was there some of that, like, wow, there it is?
Kind of. This is really the reason I came here to this seminar. I knew that I had a block of some kind that I couldn't figure out my way around. So this today is my entire reason for being here. I experienced it as kind of a vague fear that I couldn't identify. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of there, not really connected to anything. Going through this process, I identified it more clearly as a sense of fear and helplessness. And kind of following along those exercises and so on, I think it, in generality, originated with my relationship with my parents. The temperament I have is extremely independent. We talked about that on a break a little bit yesterday. And that is kind of a difficult thing for a parent to deal with because, you know, a child is supposed to submit to the parent's authority and so on. It's in the best interest of everybody for the most part. But what I took away from our interaction is that I needed to essentially wash out that strong sense of independence and ability to control myself and my environment and submit to the control of someone else. So that feeling of helplessness has stayed with me till today.
Today is not your reason for being here. You've still got a ways to go. But you are on the right track. Who can identify with the idea of, who can relate to the idea of feeling like there was something you just didn't get, there's a block, and that's one of the reasons why you're here, why you came here in the first place? Okay, who's getting a little piece of the answer right now? Okay, good. So thank you for contributing and for giving something for everyone to relate to. And I'm going to give you a clue. Controlling, and then the opposite, submitting to authority. Those might be the two ends of the spectrum, but the richness of life is actually in here. And it's not about either of those.
Hi, I'm Ray from Australia. When you were sitting there asking them those questions, I was trying to imagine you asking me those questions and going back through my own issues. And one of the problems I have at the moment is I have trouble ending a relationship. I feel like I don't want to let the woman down if she's invested a lot in me or with whatever. I have an issue around that and I've struggled with it. So I was looking back, okay, how has my past affected that? And trying to find something in my early childhood. And I would say I had a very, very good relationship with my mother. I loved sitting down and talking to her in the kitchen while she's cooking and stuff, and we still have a wonderful relationship. And I was probably an incredibly well-behaved child. I'm thinking, well, how the hell did she do that? And there's one incident that I do remember where we were just sitting down in the kitchen and I was hungry and we'd had a lovely lasagna or something the night before and I wanted some of the leftovers. And she'd sort of said, oh no, I want to keep that for tonight or something. But I just wanted it. So I kept asking. And eventually she just sort of said, oh right, you can have it then. And I suppose it was more the tone, but my response was, well, I don't want it now. I'm thinking, okay, well, why did I have that response? What was the feeling? Because you were asking the feeling. I thought, okay, well, the feeling was guilt for wanting something that she was going to use for some other purpose. And then you asked, what were you seeking, this, or approval? And, I was possibly seeking her approval in wanting to be a good child and not asked for that to give her more work to do or something like that. I thought, okay, well, where else in my life am I still seeking approval, or in the last 20 years, where have I been seeking approval? I thought, okay, well, maybe my intense academic desire and achievements in that and my sporting achievements may have all been driven by a desire for approval, even though my parents were saying, hey, slow down, take it easy, you're putting way too much pressure on yourself. And I thought it was me that was driving it for my own sense, but maybe approval was what I was looking for, I don't know. So then I thought, okay, well, in this situation where I don't want to break up with a woman, even though I know in my heart that it's not going where I want it to go, why do I feel what I'm feeling? I'm saying, well, okay, I'm still on some level trying to seek approval, even though I don't want to continue a relationship, and I'm feeling guilt about letting them down. And that was my heart. I don't know where to go with that now, but that's where I'm at.
Good. That's a good one. Thank you.
Nick from Montreal again. Basically, yesterday, I had a lot of, when you were talking about letting the process grow through you, it got stuck yesterday. And today, by going back and seeing the first time and really identifying why I did this, it actually came to a something that happened when I was like 3 years old.
Yeah.
And I was going like, oh, that's the reason I'm protecting myself and I'm defending myself again, because I feel accused of something. I felt like I wasn't trusted, and it goes back to something that I don't even remember if I did or not. The event doesn't really matter if I did it or not. It's just I was accused of it, and I felt that I was unjustly accused. And now going back all the way through it, I can see now why the emotion is there. And getting more to the core of it, more labeling it, more just
Opens up a whole new reality for you, huh?
That's it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that exercise just went insane.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
What's happening, buddy?
How's it going, buddy?
Good, nice to see you.
Brett Carr.
Thank you.
Write this down. Get the movie,
Here you go, right here.
Revolution.
Sorry, I thought I was going to get up on stage today, so.
Revolution. Brett Carr. I watched your movie,
Oh, thank you, sir.
and it was great.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Get the DVD.
So you know I have some issues.
Is that a story about you?
A metaphor.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm not a stuttering boxer, but I've had some anger issues.
Yeah.
And the stuttering is repeating my childhood relationships in my life today.
Yeah.
So which brings me to this exercise that I'm...
And by the way, Revolution, I just want to give you one
please.
more shameless plug real quick
Please.
before you start talking. Revolution is a movie that you wrote, directed, and starred in.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you'll check it out.
Thank you for...
And yeah, so watch the movie. Who's going to watch the movie? Okay.
Wow,
good. There we
man.
go.
Can I hire you for my marketing team?
Done. What was your realization?
I have a huge abandonment issue, and it displays itself even like in my text messaging, where I try to lock down the girl afterwards, and I can see it happening. And I went back to when I was about 11. My mother was a narcissist, delusional, pill-popping alcoholic, and the only way she could relate to me was to promise me that every weekend we would go on a trip to Bermuda or here or there, and I lived in New York. And I never took one trip with her in my life, except maybe a boyfriend that like one trip. But then I went back, because I've kind of done a lot of regression work. I went back to birth, and at the birth scenario, she had me and then said, okay, take him away and clean him up. And I made this decision that for the rest of my life I was going to make her love me. And it translates into my inability to, when I really like a girl, I know they can smell me just clawing after with a text or an extra phone call too early the day after I met them, or or too much of a sexual vibe, because my mother is also an incest survivor. So I picked that up, and I've kind of, through my therapy, I've gotten over dating strippers and girls that were molested. And now I'm kind of picking the yoga girls, but still, there's something that's twisting them away at the beginning stage. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank
Okay,
you, Brett.
cool. Thank you for letting me share.
So as we're creating this group conversation and we're working together to have insights and breakthroughs, I'm going to introduce a little more depth on a couple of key pieces here. There's an idea, a concept, a process, however you might want to think of it, called imprinting that happens, it seems, inside of us. And not just us, it also happens inside of a lot of animals as well. Not that I'm suggesting that we're animals or that we have an animal side. What I've found, though, is that by studying animal behavior, I've been able to understand myself a lot better and relate to myself better. We'll talk more about relating to yourself and being in relationship with yourself and in rapport with yourself and all parts of yourself a little bit later. As you notice different parts of yourself coming up that you may have not paid much attention to, welcome them, note them, be there with them, because we need to align all of these things and get them into rapport at some point. But as we talk about all of these different things, we talk about, I wanted to say one other thing about animal behavior. There's this idea that we're so different from animals that they really have nothing to teach us. And I've found that I have learned more about myself, maybe, more really important stuff about myself through studying animals than maybe any other single kind of source, which is interesting. And I'm no tree-hugging environmentalist. I'm not a crazy radical environmentalist type person, although I'm getting closer to that as I get older and I see what we're doing kind of to our environment. And so I say that to you from the perspective of someone that has grown up a more intellectual, logical, skeptical, type person. And in studying animals and animal behavior, one of the things I've come across several times is this idea of imprinting. There's a guy named, his name was Conrad Lorenz, who is thought of as one of the founders of ethology, discovered this idea of imprinting, or did a lot of work on it anyway. And what he discovered is that there's a point when an animal is born, there are these moments where there's an opening for an imprint. The creature has a part of its, however you want to think of it, psyche or body-mind that says, I need to get an imprint here so that I can know what to do in life. So as an example, there's a story of a goose that was born, little baby goose, and the only thing in its environment when it was born was a ping pong ball. So it imprinted on the ping pong ball. And as it grew up, it followed the ping pong ball around, always wanted it to be around, and later on, when it got older, it tried to mate with it. Because the ping pong ball is what got imprinted in its system as that's the thing that's one of me. I read about another one that was really interesting recently. A baby giraffe was born, and coincidentally, an accident happened where right after it was born, a Jeep hit its mom and killed the mother. So the baby giraffe got up and looked at the Jeep and imprinted on the Jeep. And as it grew up, it would vocalize and call to the Jeep, and it tried to nurse from the Jeep. And then when it grew up, it started trying to mate with the Jeep. Now, when we hear these stories, normally we think, that's just one of those weird quirks of nature. Ha ha, those animals, they sure are silly, aren't they?
The games that are keeping you from getting what you want in your life are similar to the giraffe and the Jeep. In a lot of ways, they're just that silly. Right? We want to think that we're way beyond that kind of thing. Oh, I could never have something like that happen. Now, fortunately for most of us here, when we were born, we were put into our mother's arms. Some of us maybe were taken away for a little while, but we got human contact and we got to be around our mom and nurse from her or from someone else, or had a father around, or if we were adopted, we had parent figures there. We had humans of our own species around to take care of us. We got the first imprints. We're okay. Now, for some of us that wasn't true. Some of us had really traumatic, really early times, and that's a tough one to work through. A lot of work needs to be done there. But for the most part, most of us got those first imprints. We're not trying to mate with Jeeps or ping pong balls. But there are other times when important imprints typically happen. In a lot of cultures, when a man is going from being a boy to being a man in that adolescent period, when the hormones start raging, there's a process where the boys are taken out and they're put through an intense procedure, a ritual that helps them make that transition. And you might think of that as a time when there's an opportunity for an imprint, or maybe even a need for one. A lot of us didn't get one then when we needed it. And there are others as well. I also tend to think of times when we had intense emotional experiences that came up when we were young, where we felt controlled, abused, victimized, when we felt like someone else was doing something to us that we couldn't control and we didn't like it, and we had an emotion come up, and that energy got mixed into that experience, and there could be something that we might think of as an imprint created at that time. Okay, so I'm using this term very loosely here. It's very general, just so you can get an idea of what this concept is that I'm talking about, and you can relate to it a little bit. So as we're talking about these different experiences, we're actually going backwards to get to them. Because if you had started this program and I said, okay, can you remember an experience that happened to you when you were young and you had a lot of emotion around it? You would have said, you are a fruitcake, and this is not what I came here to get. I thought we were getting the pickup lines. Inside joke for anyone that's seen the advanced series, right? We have to go backwards to get there. We have to track through your experience, what it is that you want, the things that you're experiencing that are challenges and blocks, and go all the way back until you say, oh, now I see how we get to them. So at this point now, we can address these a little bit more directly.